I appreciate the opportunity to really talk about the challenges our country faces, and perhaps it would be useful to go around the world and give some thoughts on them. I used to deal a lot with China. It's a different China today, unfortunately, and it's going to require more work, but not to steal my own thunder. If you think it's hard to work with China, try working against China, and we're seeing that today. But I also worked on some hardy perennials that have never really gone away. Megan, thank you for mentioning the always cuddly, only a mother can love North Koreans. You just want to pick them up and hug them, but they're still around too. And of course, the Balkans. I never expected to go back to Serbia. Megan mentioned that was my last ambassadorship, but so I had a call in early 2021, from the person who was to become the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. He said, do you want to work in the State Department, or do you want to work at an embassy somewhere? So I gave that a second's thought, and I said, State Department. I had in my mind working in the State Department. At my age, I'd be working for some 12-year-old. So I said, nah, I think I'll pass on that. But I'd kind of like to have my own peanut stand. I mean, out there as an ambassador, dealing with some tough issues, usually never being given guidance. I mean, I must say, the only thing worse than never being given guidance is being given guidance, because it's often quite wrong. So you have to say, great idea, State Department, but let me work on this and I'll get back to you. But anyway, so they called me a few months later and said, would you like to go to Serbia? And so it was kind of a blast from the past for me, but I think Julie and I were heading to Colorado, not to the Vail Symposium, but just to Colorado. I think we stopped in Nebraska for gas. I was debating whether is ethanol a good thing to have in your gas tank or a bad thing, and then my phone rang, and it was the White House Personnel Office telling me the president would like me to go to Serbia. So I had no idea I was going to go back there. But I tell you, when the president asks you to do something, you embrace it, and you see it as a real opportunity to work for, this country of ours. I mean, I know we always criticize it day and night, and I'll get into some of that. But there's no one better out there, and for that reason, I have a certain amount of optimism that we will get through this period and get to a point where we will, I think, reassert the goodness and the kind-heartedness and the toughness and the perseverance that our country has had. So the idea of going out to Serbia, which is a country that, I mean, God bless them, but they're people who are just emotionally exhausting even when you agree with them. They have never gotten over the Kosovo issue that I worked on some 25 years ago. But I noticed that they were getting this kind of bad rap around the world, that Serbia had become a close cooperator of Vladimir Putin's Russia. And I thought that was unfair. And if it was true, I knew we could work on it. And so I worked very hard on the idea. And how do you work hard on these things? You first of all, develop relationships. Anyone who thinks an ambassador should go to a country and start wagging his finger and telling the country, you got to do better, we don't like what you're doing, you can do that once. Like flying a helicopter upside down. It can be done, but you're not going to get much influence. So you have to work with them, and you have to, avoid the public criticisms, but be very forceful and very clear privately. And so I was very clear that, unless Serbia starts getting on the right side of history, I use that cliche, but I think it really means something. Getting on the right side of history on Ukraine, Serbia will be doomed to be understood that they were on the wrong side. Well, they were very reluctant, But then on the 4th of July, which is about three months after Julie and I had gotten there in 2022, the president invited Julie and me to a small dinner, and he held up his iPhone. He's very techno-savvy, and he said, how about if we give them 250 155 artillery shells? And artillery, before drones kind of came along as the main weapon of war in Ukraine, artillery is how it's waged. You better have enough artillery. Well, 250 shells is about, a few days expenditure, but I thought at least that starts getting them on the right side. I mean, mind you, nobody had asked me to do this, but I just thought this was the right thing to do. And so we had these contractors from the Pentagon, and before they ship stuff to Serbia, to Ukraine, they test the batch, and lo and behold, it was good. And they asked, do you have any more of that? And so before you know it, we'd developed this arms relationship, which we kept very quiet because we didn't want to upset the Russians. They've since found out, and they've since been pretty upset at the Serbs about it. But as of the time I left on January 19th, and you can figure out why I left on the 19th, but by the time I left on January 19th, we had purchased, Serbia had sold, and by the way, the dirty little secret in the world is we buy most of this stuff. From various countries, not Britain, not Germany, but various countries, we buy the armaments and we send it to Ukraine. And Serbia was enticing because it's just a 4-day truck ride to Ukraine. So we've purchased over $2 billion of 155s, of 120 millimeter heavy mortars, of 80 millimeter short range mortars. I feel like an arms merchant now. The point is, you get countries to work with you. You establish patterns of cooperation. You don't lecture them. You don't say, why did you do that, and tell them they're bad for having made some public statement. You might have created the relationship where you say, you're free to say whatever you want, but maybe that caused you more harm than good, and here's why. And if they respect you, if they trust you, they listen. They don't always follow your advice, but they listen. And often they do follow your advice. And that's why diplomacy is important. And for people who think that this country can exist only with a military, if you count the number of wars, we've had way too many, but it's still only about a handful. Wars, we can't wage war in 170 countries every time someone does something we don't like, but we can wage diplomacy. But you're not going to be able to have diplomacy without diplomats. And you're not going to be able to have diplomats who aren't empowered to go out and say things. They might get in trouble for what they're doing. I always found it was much better to ask forgiveness than permission, because asking Washington for permission is really something, I'm sure the Bible has a story about it, but you never get there. So I do hope that we can get back to the point where there is a great respect for the people who have to go out there and deal with people. I dealt with North Koreans. I wouldn't do it again. I once joked, and it almost got published, that the only time I would return to North Korea would be in a B-2 bomber, and fortunately that did not get covered. But the point is, you have to go out and deal with these people. And the second thing you have to do is, yes, there are bad actors out there, and yes, there are good actors, but it's not your luxury always to be admonishing the bad guys and praising the good guys. So the good guys need to know precisely what's in your head, what you're thinking. They need to know, okay, if we do this, you'll do that. Or if we do this, this, and this, and this, in 2 months, you're planning to do that. And they need to be able to trust your word when you say that. And so we have to be very careful on how we handle our allies. Because people who say there's no trust in diplomacy, there's a lot of trust in diplomacy. They have to be able to rely on you. I always remember in Macedonia, I was trying to convince the prime minister to do in local schools in these local villages. You wonder what in the heck was the American ambassador involved with that? But you know, before you know it, when you have worked in a country for a couple of years, they're asking your opinion about things. And I was trying to get them to allow Albanian language to be used in small villages that were majority Albanian. And they didn't want to do it. I mean, tiny little tiny little Macedonia has enough troubles making their way in the world without internal problems with the Albanians. And finally, the prime minister, a guy named Branko Crvenkovski, said to me, you know, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it, and I'll tell you why. The reason I'm going to do it is I value the relationship with the United States. And so what you've done is you've built up trust, you've built up a reservoir of some goodwill, and you've been able to get him to do something or get people to do something that they wouldn't naturally want to do. So that takes time and it takes patience. You're not going to be able to solve something like Ukraine in 24 hours. You're not going to be able to solve most of these issues in 24 hours. But what you have to do is understand that trust is definitely part of the game. I used to say that someone once asked me about the role of trust with North Korea, and I paraphrased Tina Turner as in, what's trust got to do with it? Meaning that we had, you know, national verification means, et cetera, and you can't have an arms agreement without verification. But you do need trust. You do need people saying, you know, we've done a lot of things together. You're asking me to do something I don't really want to do, but we're buddies in this. We're going to do it. And that's kind of what you're looking for. One of the discouraging things I find in contemporary America is, you know, if you go back to great empires, I don't like to call our country an empire, it's not, but it's a country with worldwide responsibilities, just as empires used to be. And if you look at Egyptian Empire, Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, all these empires, they had these vast civil services. They had people who were all over the place running the empire. Roman Empire. You know, sometimes the civil service or the local person did the wrong thing. I'd put Pontius Pilate in that category. We are in a church, I can use metaphors like that. But anyway, but the point is you had these, they relied on a huge cadre of civil servants and foreign service. So I don't know how it is that Americans got around to the view that somehow government is not the solution, a proposition I basically agree with, and government is the problem, because it is not. You know, government is not the problem. There are a lot of other problems, and what we need from government is good people to be out there serving. And if we get the right people, if we give them, you know, if they take exams, if they don't pass them, they should study harder and take them again, which is how the Foreign Service operates. Foreign Service exams, and then you'll get good people out there, and good people will generally do the right thing, and before you know it, you'll be on the right track. So it kind of pains me to see many Americans saying, no one's doing anything in Washington, let's throw them all out and get new people in. Usually that process is followed by disasters, and I think we need to be very careful about that whole approach. There is no question that governance, it has to be improved. You know, there's a lot of duplication, for example. But you know, I was out in Belgrade, and there were about 10 AID Americans there. There were 20 AID or 25 AID who were Serbian nationals, and the things they were doing out in villages, places that never had anything good to say about America. And they see our people doing these things, whether it's helping them marketing agriculture, and some things like doing prototype programs with insulation in buildings. So you don't have to knock the building down, you have to insert the insulation. And they would see, gee, this works. The heating bills are much lower as a result. So they were plans, and then people would go and raise their own money and do their own installation. So all these projects were really very important, but What it was most important in doing was in creating this kind of pattern of cooperation that we needed with a country that we had been dropping bombs on just 25 years ago. So I think we need to understand this a little better. And the aphorism that, well, Americans only learn about the world through war, well, that's not going to do, obviously, and I don't think it does do for most Americans. But we need to understand that these are complex problems, and we need to do a much better job of learning what they are. I feel that if you look at the world setup, how the world is organized today, and you hear a lot coming from contemporary officials about it, but after World War I, we took a stab at global governance through the League of Nations. And the American people, to be frank about it, simply weren't ready for that. And so Woodrow Wilson worked hard to get the creation of this kind of world federation going, and it didn't work. And so there was no global governance, continuation of bilateral treaties and things like that. Along came World War II, and it was catastrophic. How many millions of people were killed, no one will know. For our country, we were engaged in fronts in Asia and in Europe at the same time. We had troops in Africa fighting. It was just really terrible stuff. Hundreds of thousands of Americans were killed. Millions of Europeans were killed. And so after World War II, there was another major push with the creation, in San Francisco, by the way, that is in the continental US, of the United Nations. It was our idea, and it was a damn good one, and we worked very hard on it. And then when people say, well, where's the money coming from? We'll put the money up. So we worked on this global governance, this thing called the UN. Where's the headquarters? It's in New York. Yes, there are things in Geneva, but the main body of the thing is in New York. It's because we wanted it there. We've been kind enough never to insist that the Secretary General be from America, but I can tell you anytime any Secretary General has ever been nominated and we haven't liked the person, that nomination never went through. We have essentially run the United Nations for decades. If you look but we didn't stop there because we understood that in many ways the United Nations was and still is a bit of a talk shop. So we understood there's more to global governance in the UN. So we took the lead in a place in New Hampshire in the US in creating international organizations. We created the World Bank, the IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Reconstruction, of course, referring to rebuilding the world after World War II. We worked to create the International Monetary Fund, huge undertaking. We worked out who should be in charge of these things, and we tried not to put our own people forward, but there are a lot of Europeans who were in charge, very capable people, but we didn't want to look like we're dominating the things, because sometimes when you come out and dominate something and everyone knows it, they won't listen to you. So we're very kind of subtle on that. Then we understood the need there were security concerns around the world. I mean, communist Soviet Union was on the march. So we created something called SEATO, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. We created something called CENTO in the Middle East. And we created something called NATO. So what was the purpose of NATO? Was it to have us go and take care of European problems? No, of course not. The WAG at the time said, the purpose of NATO is to keep Russia out, Germany down, and the US here, in. And it has worked. It's worked pretty brilliantly. Russia has never, any country that's been a member of NATO, Russia has never touched. They can't. And the US has never insisted that the Secretary General be American. Again, we don't want to create a situation where people say, oh, it's just all a front for American leadership. So we've always turned that over to the Europeans, but guess who has been the Supreme Allied Commander of Forces Europe every time, and it's an American general. So frankly, this was all pretty amazing stuff. If you go through history, I think, you'd have trouble finding any global power that's been able to do this in the way that we did it. Nothing to be ashamed of, nothing, we did it in a subtle, effective way. And yet, here we are. Cold War is over, also a great success of NATO and of the Western Alliance. Here we are today. And I don't know the statistics, but a substantial percentage of Americans will say, we are a victim. We are a victim. That is, the world has been able to take advantage of our largesse. We've been a chump, we've been a fool, and now, by golly, we're not going to let them take advantage of us anymore. So that attitude of that we are a victim, I think, has been very problematic for our country, because when you consider yourself a victim, when you regard everyone who approaches you with suspicion, oh, they just want a job, they just want money, they just want this or that, if that's your attitude, you're not going to be much of a leader. And I think we've done very well over the years to be tough at times, be very tough at times, but also to understand what the real problems were. And somehow we're losing that. Somehow we have convinced ourselves. If you listen to country western music, it's usually, there's a famous song, "Proud to be an American," which nothing wrong with that, where at least I know I'm free. Well, what do you mean, at least you know you're free? We've got a lot of other things to be proud of, and freedom is one of them, but are you telling me the Belgians are not free, or the Dutch are not free? So this narrative we tell each other, we tell ourselves, is that somehow we have been chumps, and by golly, we're not going to let that happen anymore. So that's been a big problem as we come up to today. There's no question that after the demise of the Soviet Union, the emergence of a Russia, which was a much more benign Russia than it is today, there was a sense among the Western Europeans that there is a peace dividend. We can stop worrying about providing weapons. We can start worrying about making sure Eastern Europe, as it was called then, will have the wherewithal to be successful. So Germany, for example, plowed money into Poland, into Hungary, into these other states, but did not plow money into their military. So after a while, as other contingencies came up, for example, the issue of dealing with the Middle East, which was getting to be a much tougher problem, especially places where there was aspirations for nuclear weapons, or at least we thought they were. We found that our allies could never really come in any substantial numbers. They could come in symbolic amounts, but we, apart from the Brits and maybe the French, but we found that our allies were just not up to the task militarily. And so we rightfully said, come on, Europeans, we love you, we're together with you, we're treaty allies, but we need you to pony up a little more than that. And so they, this was back 2013, I believe, during the beginning of the second Obama administration, all the allies agreed that everyone needs to do 2%. Everyone needs to do 2% of military spending as a percentage of GDP. So countries that have been saying, well, we plan to do that 5 years from now, you got to pick up the pace. We cannot expect the Americans to do all this. And so before you know it, countries were hitting that 2% bell, and we're going further. Britain, of course, was already there. Germany was not there, but they were getting there. And I might add, Germany is complicated. While we certainly have wanted to see Germany step up its military spending, people who think a lot about history had some misgivings about Germany having a bigger defense budget. But they started to do it. And so today, a new dynamic has taken place. Our president goes to the NATO summit, and lo and behold, he comes up with a number which is 5%. It's not as bad as or as problematic as it sounds, because it involves civilian infrastructure that can be used for defense purposes as well. So it comes up with a 5% number. And lo and behold, the Germans said yes. I mean, the Europeans said yes. So what are they doing? So back in 2013, they were saying, yes, we'll get to 2%. Why? Because they knew that the Americans were getting a little grouchy at being the ones to do all the spending. And so in order to keep the Americans engaged, they all understood they needed to pony up. But what happened last month, it was actually in Canada, what happened last month was a realization that, the US may be leaving, and we need to be prepared for their leaving. I submit to you that's not the motivation we wanted to see, because we've had 2 bad experiences of not being in Europe when we needed to be. We had another one of not being in Korea when we needed to be there. And in all of them, we've had to come in not through airports, but through beaches. And we understand that we need to be there, but we need allies who are prepared to work with us. But attacking them, insulting them, accusing them of not being committed to the alliances is not the way to go. So I think we have to sort of dial it down a little and understand that we need to kind of assess what we need to do as a country. We need to look at the assets that we have. We have an economy that to some extent has been hollowed out in the fact of that it's lost a lot of manufacturing, and that needs to be dealt with. But are tariffs the best way to do that? And that is something that a lot of people ask. I had an email just 2 weeks ago from someone in Serbia saying Serbia had just been assessed a 35% tariff. And the irony is Serbia barely has any exports to the US. It's true, US firms, tech firms, are the largest trader in services for Serbia. And so when you have Microsoft building the next version of Teams in downtown Belgrade, I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff. But the Serbs said to me, what are we supposed to do about this? I mean, we can't, are we supposed to import American wine or something? What are we supposed to do? And it clearly was just done on a sort of, I would say mathematical, but it was more arithmetical view of if you are running a trade deficit, a trade surplus with the US, they would do a certain calculation that would bring it to equal. And of course, they came to these numbers and said if you don't reach 35% by August 1st, if you don't fix the deficit by August 1st, we will have a 35% tariff. It's not a negotiation. It's really not. I mean, if anyone were treated like that in private, you would probably walk away from the person who suggested that approach. I mean, maybe if you had been a rearage on, some debt or something, that's when people can speak like that, but you don't treat people like that. So I would start, a lot of places to start, but I think maybe calming down is one of them and showing some manners is another. And also getting some diplomats out there and to say to country X, we've had this problem with you, but you need to understand this is unsustainable that we run these huge deficits with you. We cannot explain this to our people. We can't. And so unless we can have some understanding from you, these are the kinds of things that I think can work. That's how the Koreans and the Japanese were almost entirely Boeing aircraft purchasers, because they knew that we meant business and we'd had enough of these trade deficits against these countries. We have to have a subject, we have to have a discussion in our country about, and we're beginning to do that against all these noises, but we're beginning to have these discussions about, how long what should supply chains look like? That was something kind of forced on us in COVID, where we realized we didn't even have masks being produced in the US. You had to go half a world away to get masks. So we're beginning to have those discussions. And I think you're going to see a lot of efforts to shorten these supply lines. We need to talk about what is the proper mix of manufactured goods versus services and things like that. After all, we have the finest electronics industry in the world, bar none, but we don't make a lot of this stuff. The stuff is made elsewhere. Is that right? I think it probably is, but let's have some smart people have a look at that and see if that's wrong, what needs to be done. Is the dollar overvalued? Is that the problem? Do we have the labor force to deal with it? So we have a lot of questions that cannot be solved in one big announcement or one big beautiful bill. So I think we need to look at a lot of these things. Meanwhile, the world is churning out problems even faster than Washington can churn out problems. This situation in Ukraine is unbelievable. We have, this has gone on for over 3 years. The Ukrainians have fought like I don't think anyone ever thought this would happen. You know, if you go back to the Soviet Army, the Red Army in World War II, and you look at what the success of these various armies, and you go down to what was called the Ukraine Front, there were really a lot of Ukrainian soldiers, and they were the ones who came through and liberated southeastern Europe. These Ukrainians know how to fight, and they're tough. And Putin felt that they didn't have an identity. Well, if they didn't have an identity before, they sure have one now. And they should have huge statues to Putin for helping to forge the Ukrainian identity. It's amazing. They have, I think, captured the world's imagination and what a small country with amount of will can do to stave off an attack from a much larger country, and a much larger country that seems intent on continuing it. So, do we just say, well, I think we've given the junior college try, so now let's see what happens? I don't think that's good enough. I think we've got to hang in there, and we've got to make sure that as long as the Ukrainians want to fight, we should be prepared to give them the weapons to do so. I think there's a growing consensus of that. I think the current administration, the new administration in Washington understands that maybe better than when they first came in. I know that countries that you wouldn't have expected, such as Serbia, are really trying to help a lot. You know, one of the reasons the Serbs had to be helpful on these 155 artillery rounds was tiny little Serbia. It's got about 6 or 7 million people. They produce more of these things than France. France was producing, they have excellent 155 shells, but they're only producing 65,000 of them. So all this problem of stockpiling has been a big problem in Western Europe. The Germans have one of the greatest tanks around, the Leopard 2. You know, every bit a match for the American M1A2 tank, but they only produce a handful per year. That's not enough. So I think the Europeans have certainly gotten the message on this, and I think they're getting very serious about Ukraine, and I think we need to be very serious about it. And I think we need to understand that that is what is important in the European front. If we, Serbia has never accepted the loss of its southern province called Kosovo. This was a struggle 25 years ago. They've never accepted it. But I told people in Washington, I said, look, they won't accept it no matter what I say, but I think the best way to get Serbia thinking westward and moving westward is to get them in our coalition with Ukraine, and that's what we ought to be working. So I think Ukraine is probably the toughest issue we have in Europe, but it's one that I think is winnable, and two, that I think Americans finally, after, I'm not including everybody, but I think people can understand this is one we can't lose. And I know, as Neville Chamberlain once said about Czechoslovakia, it's a far-off little country that none of us knows very much about. The famous Neville Chamberlain line. He, I think, resigned about a week later. I think we need to understand that Ukraine is definitely worth the fight. I think we have to strengthen these alliances. We have to show that we need to be tough about what we need our allies to do. But at the same time, we need them to be allies, and we need to be very careful how we treat them. And I think we need to be very careful. You know, words matter, and people don't like being insulted. No one likes it, and we need to be a little careful about that. And I know our president does that, but we have a lot of Americans who feel the best way to deal with another country is to yell at him. So I think we can fix things in the alliance. They will certainly listen to our trade concerns. They will definitely do that. There are reasons why we have a lot of Volkswagens and BMWs made in the United States, and that's because they've heard the message. So I think we can do a better job on that. In the Middle East, the Iranian nuclear problem, it was I think a great danger, not just to Israel, probably not to us, because I don't think Iran could ever reach us with a nuclear weapon, but certainly they could reach Israel, but also they could reach Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is not going to have a situation where Iran has nuclear capability and they don't. So I think it was a matter of time before the Saudis, who have bankrolled so much of Pakistan's economic problems, I think it was a matter of time before Saudi Arabia was going to get Pakistani assistance in terms of building nuclear weapons, and I think we'd be in a big set of problems there. I think what has happened in Gaza is something the history books, I mean, this has been a war where a great majority of the victims have been civilian, and any time that happens, you need to take a very hard look at what you're doing. But that fact doesn't absolve the fact that the Palestinians need to understand or need to decide what they want to do with Israel, which is a fact and a growingly important fact. And we need to be there. But, you know, when I was negotiating on these things like with North Korea, I was never on North Korea's side. You don't have to be on North Korea's side to negotiate with them. And so I think we do need people who can talk to the other side in these Middle East conflicts, because they're going to come up over and over again. I think the idea which the first Trump administration called the Abraham Plan was, this has been tried for a number of years, and it's a good approach. Get countries to recognize Israel. And what the Saudis have demanded is Israel recognize Palestine. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, but the idea of making things safe for Israel, I get it. But when you have partners, you need to have a dialogue, you need to have trust, and you need to have an understanding of what each of you are trying to do. And we don't have that yet in the Middle East. I think China is probably our biggest challenge in the world. People always, I notice all too often this idea that China is this giant economic problem for us. I think it is. I mean, they're very good at making things. Anyone who hasn't realized that ought to spend a moment in China, and you'll see it. They also are spending heavily in the military. Their annual growth of expenditures, not nearly as much as we have in terms of, because they're starting with a lower base, but it's around 13%. It's way too high, and it's indicating that they seem to be preparing for something bigger, or for doing more in the world than they've done in the past. But the real issue is technology. The real issue is AI. The real issue is the fact that China is investing heavily, and they're going to become, if we're not careful, they're going to become the technological leader in the world, if they aren't already. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with having China as a technological leader. I'm not even comfortable having Chinese embassies bigger than our embassies, because we have this false economy of firing 10 people and thinking that will make us better. I'm just not comfortable with this idea of turning it over to China and having China be a leader in a number of areas, especially in technology, but also in diplomacy. They talk to more people than we do. I don't think they say the right things, but they talk to more people. So that's a challenge for us dealing with China. Fortunately, we have some good friends who agree with us on this. You know, I used to go to Vietnam, which was part of my parish, I guess, as assistant secretary, and they would talk about the kind of latest outrage by the Chinese, the fact that they would have an American business company interested in exploring for oil, and the American company said, you know, the Chinese have offered us a bigger exploration place. And they've told us, if we do work in your country, Vietnam, they will not allow them to do work in China. Well, this is ridiculous, and we need to be very tough on this kind of thing. So I said to the Vietnamese, I said, well, what can we do? I mean, what's your thought on how to do it? I was racing through my mind, what other things can we do with China? And the Vietnamese said, I just want you to know that. We don't have any ideas. They're a huge neighbor of ours. We have to deal with that. You go to Vietnam today, you get a different approach. They have their arms wrapped around your legs and telling you, don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. I mean, they are very worried about China. China's become a much more belligerent factor in the world than it was even as late as when I was doing it in 2009. So we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to deal with it diplomatically as well. We're going to have to engage them. I came to Serbia and I said, what's the Chinese ambassador like? And the answer in my embassy was, we don't know, we're not allowed to talk to them. I'm sorry, I just have no patience for that kind of thing. If you can't talk to anybody, you shouldn't be in diplomacy. So there's a lot to be concerned about with China, but I would say the way to deal with China is through our example. Be better organized, have a better approach to the problems, have more friends than the Chinese. The Chinese often go to Southeast Asia, and when they leave, people never want to talk to them again. They're not very good at this, but they learn. They learn. And so we can't rely on the Chinese shooting themselves in the foot. We need to be much more active. So when a Chinese official goes to Indonesia and spends 2 weeks there, understanding the people and understanding what's going on. And we have an official who spends 3 hours in Indonesia before they have to go on to Malaysia. That night, have dinner in the morning, go to Thailand. That's not covering the area diplomatically. So we got to do better on that. I really think if we can get through Ukraine, this Europe, it's been everyone's view for many years, Europe is so passé, we should be thinking about other places. I get it. I mean, I'm a big believer in Asia, big believer in the American legacy in Asia, but I think we could do a lot more with the Europeans if we can calm that situation down, if we can treat people with decent respect, if we can understand we're not going to get everything today, and maybe not even tomorrow, but we have one thing that's very powerful. We're still the strongest country in the world. There's none other. And if you say, well, U.S. leadership is gone, well, tell me where it's coming from. I don't think the Chinese are going to dominate world leadership. And I know Americans are uncomfortable with it. I mean, I'm from Little Compton, Rhode Island. Do you think anyone in Little Compton, Rhode Island wakes up in the morning saying, we want to dominate the world? No. So we need to understand that this is our fate. Countries have had far worse fates than we've had, and I think we really ought to understand. We ought to regain some self-confidence, regain not only respect for others, but respect for each other. And that is, I think, a growing problem in the U.S., where we don't even talk to each other, let alone the Chinese. Finally, I would conclude, maybe some of you have heard this story, but there was a Polish party first secretary back in the late 50s, early 60s, with the forgettable name of Władysław Gomułka. And Władysław Gomułka, not a terribly effective Communist Party leader, but he was in charge for 8 years. And one day he was in southern Poland giving a speech. And he was known for very long speeches and not entirely successful metaphors. And one day he stood up in front of a crowd in Krakow, this beautiful southern Polish city, and he said, comrades, just a few years ago, our country stood on the very edge of a deep abyss. And I'm telling you today, comrades, that we have taken an important step forward. So let's not do that. Okay, thank you very much. And
hi, first of all, I thank you for coming, and I thought your comments were excellent. But with our current president, who does not seem to respect or changes his mind every few days. How do you go about implementing the things you talked about?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a challenge. I'm not here really to talk about our president, but I think it's a big challenge. But I think the answer lies in our institutions, and and I know the court system. It hasn't been easy. God, I was just reading about the Dred Scott court case by what was his name, Roger Taney, in 1854, and so we've had difficulties with Supreme Court decisions through the years. But I think Americans everyone should take some responsibility for trying to, show capacity to talk to their neighbors, even if they disagree with their neighbor. I mean, what gets me, as long as we're in this religious place, is, basically, teachings of Jesus were pretty straightforward. It wasn't love your Defense Department or love your State Department. It was love your neighbor, and I think we've kind of fallen off of that a little. And I think our country needs to come together around the things that we agree with. Beyond that, look, it's a one-term president, and whoever comes next, should think about these things, and the voters should make clear to whoever comes next that the voters will hold people to maybe different standards. Again, I spent a whole career staying out of other people's internal politics, and I also like to stay out of my internal politics. But it is, we have a situation here. There's no question, and I think it's very important that we do a better job of what they say in the Senate and Congress, speaking across the aisle, and we don't do enough of that.
Back here.
Thank you very much for being here and your comments. Someone mentioned the Thanksgiving dinner and having a better conversation. If you would, your recommendation on 2 books to read, to suggest to someone on the other side of the table to read, and for us to read. One written in the last 2 years to help understand things.
You're ruling out my book with that comment, but that's okay. That's okay.
And one written prior to then to better ground us in what current affairs are.
Let me see. There was the Icarus effect, and I'm sorry, I got to get the authors. I should get back to you on this. That was written a few years ago about America, sort of thinking that, this idea that we could solve every problem, if not our own, then everyone else's, and the point being that we need to, I don't say lower our sights, but understand that problems need to be resolved in a way that are sustainable. The word sustainable, which kind of got stuck in just issues of environment, is actually a very good word for a lot of other things. Sustainable politics would be politics where you don't expect someone to go off on the extreme with you, that you understand that that person has a different point of view. And another book, I'm sorry, I just have to think about it.
We'll get your recommendations and send it in the post-event
Please,
email.
I will be happy to. I've got a few, actually. Book clubs are good for that. So.
One thing that really interests me is the China-Russia relationship, and it has a very fraught past for the last at least couple hundred years, I think. And so I'm wondering, it would be nice not for the U.S. not to have to go up against both of them. I don't think that's sustainable. So I don't know, your comments on that?
Of the China-Russia relationship?
Yeah.
Yes. That's such an important question. A few years ago, I was invited to Shanghai on the occasion of the Shanghai Accords, which Nixon signed. And it caused me to do some reading on the Shanghai Accords. And obviously everyone knows about the Shanghai Accords. This basically began the normalization of U.S.-Chinese relations. But as I read further, it dawned on me that what was really important about the Shanghai Accords was it broke the Sino-Soviet axis. It really made very clear, you know, they had some fighting up on border disputes and other issues, and people knew that China and Russia were not, or China and the Soviet Union were not close, but the Shanghai Accords kind of ratified it. And really, if you think, when did the Cold War end? Well, I was thinking of the Berlin Wall, of course. It was our signing of the Shanghai Accords with China. So it's very discouraging today to hear people say, well, we forced China to use its veto with Russia. I consider that a loss. And I think if we allow a situation where China and Russia are back in cahoots, I think it's very bad news for our security. Now, I don't support either of them in any way. I mean, a little more respect for China than for what is going on in Russia, obviously. But I think that should be paramount in our mind, to make sure they don't work together. And so when we publicly excoriate the Chinese for what we think they may be doing with the Russians, they're actually not doing a lot in terms of helping the Russian military, but they are doing some things. I would say take it up privately, you know, and I think it's much more effective. And I think this social media issue, in addition to being very polarizing around the world, has really, I think, caused, first of all, everyone thinks they're an expert. That's because of Wikipedia. But, you know, it's really, I mean, you read a book on Amazon.com, and then it says, hey, if you like that crazy book, we've got 5 more crazy books just for you. And so really the algorithm is, if you're going to read a crazy book like that, read a couple of sensible books, which will give another side of the picture. We don't have that. And so I really worry that our society is going to more extremes. And so the thought about China is we can decouple the relationship. I don't think I just don't see that as helpful to us. That is a country with the most amazing capacity to make things. And you know, there's a place in the world economy for that, and a place in the world economy much more so than in the Russian military. Yeah. Are you? Oh, yeah. There'll be a couple of. Yeah.
Good evening, and thank you for your comments, and also thank you for your service to our country. My question is, you have commented that we need to do better on the diplomatic front, and we have a couple more years where we may not be doing better. So I'm curious on your thoughts on the resiliency of bouncing back from damage done to on the diplomatic front. Like, how long does it take to earn the trust back from countries that we've lost trust from?
Yeah, I think resiliency, a word that really has come into vogue in recent years, is particularly apt in the circumstances. I think the State Department has been quite harmed. I mean, I served in the State Department for a long, long time. Believe me, I have my litany of complaints. I mean, my comment about, you know, getting guidance and then you get some stupid thing that you can't do anything with, so, you know, I'll write my own guidance, thank you. Or some of the, you know, the way the State Department just has this kind of craven feel that it's somehow afraid of its own shadow. That's got to change, obviously. There's got to be a much more of a, you know, the military, some commander out there dealing with a problem. You may get, you know, if there's some egregious error, there'll be some, you know, board of inquiry or something. I mean, that happens. But generally in the military, the guy who's out there or whoever is out there gets supported because that person knows best. And we don't have that sense in the State Department. You know, like, oh, who gave you permission to do that? Is a common point. So I think it can be, dare I use the expression, built back better, in the sense that there are a lot of bad habits which need to be fixed. But, you know, there was a guy, he was kind of crazy, who wrote a book. He was one of these really right-wing, out there writers named Edward Luttwak. And he wrote a book, Why We Need More Waste, Fraud, and Mismanagement in the Pentagon. And so he said, okay, what's he got to say about this? And he was saying, the more you worry about waste, fraud, and mismanagement, albeit important subjects, he wasn't saying they were, you fail to think about strategy. And I'm more interested in better strategy. And if someone doesn't fill out their travel voucher properly, yeah, someone should fix things like that. But we need to be much better on strategy, anticipating things, getting the people in place, getting the people in the field so that they can deal with that problem, rather than worrying, whether the Congress will support us on that. I mean, I think we need to obviously work harder on, getting support. But I think the State Department, I offer all these criticisms of a career of 30 plus years, but no one has a better foreign ministry than we do. So I think our State Department can be fixed. And I talking to a lot of kids. I mean, I taught students at DU, and they'd love to do it. So I think we can get over it. And besides, we have the world's shortest collective memory. We could barely remember what happened last Thursday. So maybe we could put that to our strength.
Back of the room.
Thank you, sir. If Ukraine had been admitted to NATO, would this war have ever taken place? And if Ukraine survives in some shape or form, should they then be admitted to NATO?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a big issue because, when Russia acceded to the 1955 Austrian neutrality agreement, it was the Austrian agreement that made Austria neutral. That was the only reason Russia had troops right up into Vienna. They had troops patrolling Vienna. And so they wanted a situation where Austria would never join NATO. So the Austrians didn't want to put that in the treaty because they felt it was an infringement on their sovereignty. So they passed an agreement. They passed something in their parliament a few months before, saying they were not going to join any collective security group. So I do not see a situation where the Ukrainians, having fought a long time for their continued independence, are going to accept something where Russia and the US or the Europeans say we'll never allow them into NATO. I think it will be up to the Ukrainians to determine what's the best way to end the war and regain their health as a nation. But I think it's very problematic for us to try to tell the Ukrainians, no, you ain't getting into NATO because Russia doesn't like you. So I don't think I can really answer your question, and I certainly can't answer the hypothetical, what if they'd been in NATO? Because if they'd been in NATO, a lot of different things would have happened. I think it was wise of us to start helping their military, as we did after Crimea, but before this latest catastrophe, and I think we did the right thing. But getting into NATO, I think that's going to be very difficult, but I'd like to hear the Ukrainians talk about that. And then at some point, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that you could never have Ukraine in NATO. People say that about Finland. Well, that's changed. So, and I'm not sure Russia, I don't know how this war is going to end, but I'm not sure Russia's earned any right to have a veto on Ukrainian entry into an organization which, by the way, the Russians, we gave them status in NATO under the Founding Act. They walked away from it. So I'm in a pretty grouchy mood about the Russians these days.
There's another NATO question from our online audience. There are some suggesting that Europe will need to develop their nuclear arsenal in the event that the U.S. does not keep their NATO promise. However, they seem to be dragging their feet on taking responsibility for their own defense. Do you think they are trying to wait out the current administration's term, or is it just inertia? Is it a lack of spine or wait and see mentality?
Not sure I quite understood that well in the middle, but it had to do with, should Europe develop its own nuclear deterrence out of concern that the US may not be there for them in Article 5 of NATO? Is that kind of what it was? Who am I looking for? Oh, here you
I think so.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, there are two articles in NATO, the Washington Agreement of NATO, which people should read carefully. One is Article 3, and that has to do with maintaining deterrence. And the second article worth reading is Article 5. If deterrence fails, everybody's in. And I don't think this administration or any administration would be prepared to walk away from that. You know, call me an optimist, but I don't think anyone would be prepared to do that. As for countries developing their own nuclear capacity, I noticed that Britain and France are not walking away from theirs. And if anything, there's been some modernization of the British nuclear deterrence of late. But I don't think most Europeans are thinking that a nuclear capability is the best way to handle this. I think they have a lot more to do on deterrence with their conventional forces. And I might add that Russia, as hideous and belligerent as they are, they have a GDP in their economy that of Italy. So I think Europe should be able to handle this as a conventional threat. And I think Britain and France, to the extent that the US needs partners in a nuclear umbrella, they could handle that. I might add one other thing. One of the reasons I'm so concerned about the North Koreans is the Japanese, who have never been interested in developing nuclear weapons. If you look at polling data, it's up. It's not majority by any means, and I hope it never will be, but there are people in Japan who talk about nuclear deterrence because of North Korea. There are people in South Korea who talk about it. So this is another reason why we need to keep that club of nuclear countries as small as we can.
Thank you for offering your vision of how this difficult global environment might find its way to peace. I would ask you to consider what's happening in the Middle East. The position of most administrations of recent memory here in the United States is that there should be a two-state solution. The difficulty that I see is that the mentality of Hamas, Hezbollah, even the Palestinian Authority, is that that must never happen. And that Israel is seen as a colonial presence in the Middle East. But more than geopolitical considerations, there are religious, theological, and ideological ones. That's an intractable challenge which kindness, compassion, understanding, and mercy may not be able to bridge. So what I would ask you, as a seasoned diplomat, what do you envision, other than all-out war and ultimate surrender of one side, diplomatically, to bring about the peace that we all seek?
You know, it's the crux of the whole issue, really, in the Middle East, with respect to Israel. Although after Arab Spring, I found it therapeutic that suddenly people in the world understood not every problem in the Middle East has to do with Israel. That's important. But I think the issue you raise is essential to the Palestine-Israel issue. And call me old-fashioned, but I think some kind of two-state solution has to be done. I don't know how they would be linked, whether they would be linked, but I just can't see a one-state solution that will work. And the two-state solution has been the U.S. position for decades, and there's a reason. No one had a better idea. Well, the current administration thinks they have a better idea, but I'm not sure they do, and I think that's a proposition they have definitely not proven. So I still think some kind of two-state solution is necessary. There are always the problems of the map, the fact that Gaza is not contiguous with the West Bank. clearly that's, you recall the division of India, and you had two Muslim enclaves. They were supposed to be one country, East Pakistan and Pakistan, and they became, and West Pakistan, and of course, East Pakistan became Bangladesh. I don't see Gaza ever independent, frankly, if it even is able to be part of a Palestinian entity. But clearly, the current solution of, some terrorists wax the Israelis and the Israelis whack the village. I think we've got to really spend some time on this, and I think we've got to spend not just time talking to the Israelis, but I think we need to be on both sides and talk to other people. Anyone who, I read the sort of minute by minute various Israeli accounts of what happened on October 7th. It was pretty awful. I mean, anyone who's had a kid who's gone to a rock concert, it was pretty amazing. But there's a point at which we need to see what are we going to do, how is this going to, where's it going to lead? And I have problems with the idea that the two-state solution is off the table.
Trump has proposed additional sanctions in Ukraine if Russia doesn't come to the table. They're proposing sanctions on countries that trade with Russia. Exactly how would that work?
I think you've answered your own question. First of all, they don't have enough trade to make it work. Even if you had tariff rates that effectively, like a 30% tariff rate, depending on the effective tariffs. I learned some of this tariff stuff in junior high school, so I'm a little out of my memory lane on this. But you get to a point where the effective rate is not 30, but it's total, so there won't be any trade. But in Russia's case, there's so little trade anyway. And I have a problem with using tariffs as our only means to deal with countries. I don't think it's become credible, and I think it ends up hurting ourselves. For example, Brazil, we have a lot of things we're doing in Brazil, and we're really going to have a 50% tariff because we don't like the trial they've been giving former President Bolsonaro? Really? That's how we're going to handle this? So I think there's a lot too much focus on tariffs, and as a kind of shortcut to understanding particular situations, which I get back to the question of more diplomats who know what they're talking about.
Your left side.
Actually, I didn't have a question, but thank you. But now that I have the microphone.
You may not have a question, but you got the microphone. Even better.
The sale of AI chips to UAE and the fact that President Trump got a small Cessna or something in return. It was totally anticipated. But I saw in today's Wall Street Journal that there are people, I think at NSA, that are still opposing the sale of the NVIDIA chips to UAE. And I've found that sort of remarkable because you don't hear of anybody in the Trump administration sort of saying no to the president. And I'm just wondering if you have any idea what group that is that's still holding back on transferring the NVIDIA trips to UAE.
It's funny you mentioned the Wall Street Journal. Today, the president sued the Wall Street Journal and sued Rupert Murdoch as well over, I guess, Jeffrey Epstein birthday greetings or something. I think the issue on selling those chips has to do with UAE's the fact that they have had relations with a lot of, we have security concerns about their capacity to use those chips solely in UAE and the capacity to handle that kind of technology. And I think if you go into rank and file people who really know their stuff, they have a lot of concerns about it. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I think listening to the experts is a good place to start, and I don't think there's enough of that.
Good evening. As a senator, Marco Rubio had an outstanding reputation as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I assume you either had dealings with him or were a close observer of that committee. His past 6 months' performance seems to leave a lot to be desired. Is he out of his depth? Will he grow into the job? Or to quote another song, is he under Trump's thumb? What's your thoughts on what we can expect?
Somebody has to be Secretary of State, and I think he had more experience than a lot of the other candidates who were proposed. I guess, I think he's trying to manage the job by getting some things done under the radar screen, and then pleasing the boss. That's an occupational hazard, not just Secretary of State. Everyone has to do that. I guess where I come out on some of that, I don't want to get personal about him. I mean, when he did become Secretary of State, a lot of people said, well, he's an adult. He knows what he's doing. And, I think he's got a very tough job because he has an audience of one. And so that's very difficult. But I will say one thing. And I don't like to give advice to secretaries of state, but, if you're going to fire 1,400 people, you ought to be there. You ought to be there in the building. You ought to shake some of their hands. You ought to say, thank you. I'm so sorry it came to this. You ought to be there. He wasn't. I have a problem with that. I've had to do unpleasant things, and it's no fun, but that's why they pay you. So you do it. And so the idea that he had to be in Singapore that day or whatever it was, I'm sorry, I have trouble with that.
On your left side.
Thank you. I have a question, reference your experience with North Korea.
Yeah.
And the negotiations for their acquisition of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And did you or did the people that were working with you and the other folks over there with Korea, did we learn anything applicable, either positive or negative, that we can apply to our current situation that we're dealing with another rogue nation in a different part of the country, in a different part of the world, Iran?
Important question. They are different situations. For example, North Korea has about 14,000 artillery tubes on the DMZ capable of hitting the metropolis or megalopolis of Seoul, 20 million people. So if you want to go to Yongbyon and with bunker buster bombs and hit what we believe to be some of their highly enriched uranium facilities to try to knock them out, you then have to decide, what are you going to do about these 14,000 artillery tubes that may well be used against 20 million people? For starters, you probably have to tell the South Korean government, we have this great idea that we're going to attack Yongbyon. And the South Korean government might say, great idea, but we got to tell 20 million people that you're going to do this. So you kind of, how to put it, lose the element of surprise there. So in short, not every solution is applicable. But I think what is very important, and which I think is applicable to Iran, from what we knew about North Korea, is we didn't know enough about North Korea. We didn't have enough people there. We would have the North Koreans messed up their agricultural harvest, and they needed food. So the food thing that is based in Rome. So they need food monitors. And so CIA came to me and said, hey, we could do that. We got a bunch of people who no one will know that they speak Korean. I said, great. I go to the White House at the time. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. Well, why don't we don't want to do that? Oh, the North Koreans would just hide it anyway. They won't tell us anything. That's where when you don't know enough, you got to be open. You have an open door to learning more. And I think there's a lot more we can learn about Iran than we haven't learned. partly because it's so toxic for us. I mean, there was the diplomats, who were taken prisoner in, what was it, 78, 79. There were the Iranians talk like it was yesterday when we overthrew their leadership in 1950. So there's a lot of bad history there, but I just feel we would do a better job with Iran if we understood it better, and we don't. And I felt the same way about North Korea, and I hate to see the same mistake repeated.
Down here.
Thank you for the time and taking all these questions. We've all watched initially the decimation of USAID, and then right now, I guess the PEPFAR program is kind of hanging by threads.
PEPFAR is this anti-malaria program in Africa,
and all
started by George W. Bush.
Right. And then I've read of some other just international medical assistance that's come through different U.S. channels, and I've been intrigued that term of soft power. It's been our projection of soft power that's been really important. Can you talk about how that changes or impacts the diplomacy, the efforts that you all have to try to carry out? It seems like it's been a great tool, but...
Yeah, you got it. I mean, the more, it's easier for diplomats when you're doing more things to help a country with problems that they have. Not just asks that you're making that maybe they don't want to give, but problems that they have and that they need solutions for. PEPFAR is a great example of that. I think we not only saved a lot of lives in Africa, but we also bought a lot of goodwill in Africa. It's shocking to know, but there's diplomacy and there's money in diplomacy, in the sense, not that a diplomat says, here, we'll pay you this money, now do this. No, but rather we've got this aid program. We've sat down. We've gone through all the issues. We're not imposing some kind of supply-driven program. We want to hear what you need, and so you work something out, and then it's easier on the diplomatic side. And we've lost that for no reason. And that's the thing that really gets me. I mean, look at the deficit. Look at what causes that deficit, and then look at the AID budget. Many Americans think our budgeted foreign assistance is like 6% of GDP or something. It's less than 1% of government expenditure, and even that includes the military. Oh, and why do we give military weapons? Because I'd rather it be American weapons with American traders, with people going to the States and learning American ways, rather than coming from China or Russia. Is that so hard to understand? But for many Americans, it seems to be. So.
Ambassador Hill, we've got time for one more quick one.
Taiwan is a very delicate diplomatic issue.
Yeah.
How do you see that issue evolving over the next 10 years?
Of the issue evolving? I wasn't able to go to Taiwan until I was out of the government, and I was at the University of Denver. And actually, Julie and I went on a trip to Taiwan. And, one of the big questions is whose side is time on? And when you go to Taiwan, you get the sense of a people who are, it's no longer the KMT, that is the losing side of the China Civil War, who went refuge in Taiwan. It's, there's a bigger, growing element in Taiwan that feels they're a different identity. They don't feel they're Chinese. And yeah, their forefathers may have come from China, but it doesn't mean much. I mean, forefathers of many people in the Philippines came from China. It doesn't really mean much. So that is if you're China, you know that. There's nothing, a feather doesn't fall in Taiwan without some report being written about it in Beijing. So they know what is going on, and so they've got to be worried about it. At the same time, I think our policy, which was best described by Henry Kissinger, is creative ambiguity. No one's really sure what we're going to do. I mean, you don't want a situation where we say, if they lay a hand on Taiwan, we're into World War III. You don't want to do that. But you don't want to say, hey, we'll never touch Taiwan, because that will be the end of Taiwan. So this creative ambiguity has been very important. But we live in an era where creative ambiguity is a quaint expression representing a different time, and everyone wants to say what's exactly in their gut, and I worry about it. So you say 10 years, probably more bad things than good things. So,
Ambassador Hill, before we have an opportunity to thank you, you've gotten to know our community here over several visits to the Vail Symposium and now through a lengthy Q&A tonight. Can you give us a kind of final thought, something to hang our hats on as we dive back into the daily cycle of news and drama on the global stage?
you don't think I've had enough good questions here? Look, I would just say, and I think I've mentioned this, Americans cannot be indifferent to these issues. I mean, these issues are extremely important to us, and we need to understand them a lot better than we do. I lived in Yugoslavia, then later lived in Serbia. And, while in Serbia, I learned a lot about the Black Hand, Gavrilo Princip and his guys who killed the Archduke. And everyone thought, well, what does that have to do with anything? It started in World War I and 20 million people were killed. So it really pays to understand these things. I'd like to see our schools do a better job. I'd like to see NPR. Oh, wait, all right, well, we'll work on NPR. But I think we really, as a country, whether we like it or not, we are it. And we've got to do a better job of understanding these things, which I think is what you guys are all about. And I think we've got to do more of it. And I'd love to come here for a sixth try. So,
Sir, please come back anytime. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Christopher Hill.
Thank you very much.